He cradled her carefully, holding her alien form as if the universe itself depended on his grip. Her body, luminous with faint bioluminescent streaks of teal and violet, rested against his chest, the warmth of her presence defying the cold emptiness of the cosmos. Stars flared and pulsed in distant galaxies. Meteors streaked like molten sparks across the void, and nebula swirled in elegant, chaotic patterns. Yet none of it mattered. The gravity of his arms around her created a private world, a pocket of certainty amid the infinite uncertainty of space. She pressed herself closer, her delicate hands tracing the contours of his shoulders and chest, memorizing the feel of a human heart beneath his skin. Her touch was gentle yet insistent, a language of surrender and trust that he understood instinctively. Above them, the galaxy whispered its secrets in radiant bursts of light and color. Planets rotated in precise arcs, spinning silently as if observing the fragile connection between two beings from different worlds. Her eyes, large and glowing faintly in response to the ambient stellar light, blinked slowly, reflecting nebula in their depths. In those eyes, he saw wonder, curiosity, and vulnerability, emotions she rarely allowed herself to display, except when pressed into the gravity of his embrace. Every heartbeat, every exhalation, every tremor of her form conveyed an intricate symphony of trust and surrender that transcended words. Her alien physiology, capable of withstanding extremes of heat, radiation, and gravity, quivered now not from fear, but from the intensity of the bond forming between them. She leaned her head fully against his shoulder, letting her glowing hair cascade over his arms and chest. Strands of luminescence drifted in arcs, catching the reflected light of distant suns and creating miniature constellations of their own. He marveled at the paradox of it. A being who had survived cosmic storms, navigated worlds teetering on the edge of annihilation, and traversed light years of empty space, now found solace in the warmth of a human's embrace. He adjusted slightly, molding his arms to her shape, letting the steady rhythm of his heartbeat become the foundation of her sense of security. Every subtle quiver, every gentle movement was a message he felt reverberate through his own body, a message of trust, of surrender, of a choice to exist fully within his orbit. Meteors flared past, trailing arcs of molten brilliance across the void. Planets rotated in silent harmony, casting intermittent reflections of light onto their forms. Suns flared intermittently, their brilliance bright enough to momentarily illuminate distant cosmic debris, yet the light never reached the gravity of their shared moment. Within his embrace, she had found an anchor, a singular point of constancy amid a universe defined by chaos. Her breathing synchronized slowly with his, subtle yet deliberate, and he felt each exhalation against his chest as a pulse of trust that tethered her more firmly than any gravitational field in the galaxy could. Her fingers moved lightly along his torso, memorizing contours, warmth, and subtle vibrations, and he responded with equal care, letting his hands trace the arcs of her alien form, feeling the rhythm of her presence resonate through him. The bioluminescence in her hair pulsed softly, arcs of teal and violet curling over his shoulders like living ribbons, catching the light of distant nebulae. He could feel her quiver faintly against him, a delicate vibration that spoke of exhilaration, awe, and surrender. The universe around them roared in cosmic splendor, meteors streaking, stars igniting, and distant galaxies whispering in wavelengths beyond comprehension, but it all became background. The private orbit they had created, the gravity of their connection, eclipsed every celestial event. Her head tilted slightly, brushing her luminescent strands along his collarbone, and he felt her exhalation pulse against him like a wave of light, subtle and profound, anchoring both of them in the moment. He pressed a gentle kiss to the crown of her head, feeling her tremor of delight and trust, a quiver that ran through her entire form. Each beat of her heart, each subtle flicker of bioluminescence, mirrored the rise and fall of his own, creating a shared rhythm older than any star, older than time itself. Meteors flared and faded, distant suns pulsed in brilliant arcs, and planetary fragments continued their silent revolutions, yet none of it reached the sanctuary they had formed. Every pulse, every heartbeat, every subtle exhalation reinforced the gravity of presence, the quiet, unspoken acknowledgement that, in each other's orbit, they had found something eternal. Minutes stretched into hours. The chaos of the galaxy, the meteors, the flaring suns, the distant, spinning planets, diminished into a spectacular backdrop, highlighting the intimacy of their connection. She rested her hands lightly against his chest, letting herself sink further into his arms, and he adjusted instinctively, holding her close, molding his body to hers, and letting the rhythm of their mutual trust define a moment suspended in time. Her glowing hair traced soft arcs across his skin, pulsing faintly as if responding to the rhythm of his heartbeat. He pressed his cheek against her head, closing his eyes and feeling the gentle warmth of her body, the subtle pulse of her life, and the quiet, radiant trust she offered. And as the galaxy whispered around them, stars twinkling and distant suns burning, he realized that no force in the cosmos could match the gravity of their shared presence. She had chosen him. She had surrendered herself entirely and completely into his orbit. And in that surrender lay a power older than supernovas, stronger than black holes, and more luminous than any nebula. He cradled her as the galaxy whispered around them, and in that quiet, fragile, and radiant moment, he understood the meaning of presence, trust, and connection, a force that could anchor the heart amidst the vastest reaches of space, a force that made even the chaos of the universe seem small, insignificant, and infinitely beautiful. Her breathing slowed into a gentle rhythm, a cadence that intertwined naturally with his heartbeat, as if their very lives were forming a shared symphony in the quiet of the cosmos. The galaxy continued its vast, luminous dance around them, distant suns flaring in bursts of gold and crimson, meteors streaking through the void like molten fire, and planets spinning in their silent, precise orbits. Yet all of these cosmic wonders seemed distant, irrelevant, when measured against the gravity of the connection they shared. She pressed herself closer, molding her form against his chest, and he adjusted instinctively, letting his arms become her sanctuary, the anchor that steadied her in an indifferent universe. Her bioluminescent hair, radiant with arcs of emerald and violet, drifted across his shoulders and chest, reflecting the distant starlight in ephemeral ribbons of living light. Each pulse of her glow seemed to respond to his heartbeat, the rhythm slightly imperfect but harmonious in its imperfection, a melody composed of trust, intimacy, and the delicate awareness of being completely known. She traced patterns across his chest with her slender fingers, memorizing the curves, the warmth, and the subtle tremors of a human form that had become her anchor. The alien physiology that had allowed her to survive cosmic storms, navigate worlds teetering on the brink of annihilation, and traverse light years of vacuum had now surrendered completely to him, allowing him to cradle her gently yet firmly, as if he were the only constant in existence. He pressed his cheek against the crown of her head, feeling the tremor of her delight ripple through her form, a vibration that resonated faintly against his chest. The galaxy whispered around them, stars pulsed, planets rotated in slow arcs, and meteors carved bright paths through the darkness. But these grand cosmic events faded into insignificance beside the subtle, profound presence of the being pressed into his arms. He marveled at the paradox. A creature capable of traversing the farthest reaches of space, alien in form and function, had chosen a human as the locus of her trust, as the center of her orbit, and he held her with the reverence, care, and patience such a trust demanded, knowing that even a moment's lapse could shatter the fragile equilibrium they had established. Her glowing hair shifted with the slightest movement, drifting like rivers of light over his arms and shoulders, wrapping them in arcs that mirrored the surrounding nebulae. She exhaled softly, a breath that carried awe, relief, and quiet joy, and he could feel the subtle resonance of it through his chest. Her pulse, faintly visible in the luminescent streaks of her form, throbbed in an irregular rhythm that harmonized with his heartbeat, forming a delicate, private cadence that the galaxy itself seemed to acknowledge. He pressed his lips gently to the top of her head, feeling the warmth of her presence, the fragile quiver of her surrender, and the profound weight of the responsibility that came with holding a life so radiant and delicate in his arms. Time lost all meaning. Minutes stretched into hours, hours collapsed into timelessness. Meteors continued their streaks, distant suns flared with brilliant intensity, and planets rotated in their measured arcs, but none of it penetrated the orbit of intimacy they had created. She pressed herself further against him, letting her hands slide across his chest, arms, and shoulders, following the contours of his body as if mapping it into memory. Every subtle pulse, every shiver of delight, every exhalation of trust reinforced the gravitational pull that bound them together, a force far stronger than the gravity of any planet, star, or black hole. He adjusted his hold, cradling her fully, letting his hands slide along her back, tracing the subtle curves of her form, and feeling the faint vibrations of her bioluminescent glow beneath his fingers. Her pulse echoed faintly against his chest, each beat a quiet acknowledgement that she had surrendered completely to him. Her head rested against his collarbone, her hair cascading across his shoulder, and he marveled at the way she shimmered in the reflected starlight, a living constellation bound to him by trust, surrender, and something deeper than instinct or survival. The galaxy whispered. Flaring suns painted arcs of molten brilliance across distant clouds of interstellar dust, yet he remained solely focused on her. The warmth of her body, the rhythm of her pulse, the subtle tremor of her delight, and the radiance of her trust. She shifted slightly, pressing closer, letting her head sink deeper into his chest. Her hands rested lightly along his shoulders, fingertips brushing in a delicate, precise rhythm, as if imprinting the memory of him into her very form. He adjusted, letting his arms mold perfectly to her curves, feeling the warmth of her body meld with his, the luminescent strands of her hair draping across him like living threads of light. Meteors streaked past, distant planets revolved silently, and suns flared intermittently. But all external chaos was irrelevant. She had chosen him, had surrendered into his orbit, and that choice created a gravity more powerful than any force the universe could conjure. Her breathing deepened, soft and deliberate, each exhalation a quiet pulse that resonated with him. He felt her trust, her surrender, and the quiet intensity of her emotions in every subtle shift of her body, every pulse of bioluminescent glow, and every delicate brush of her hair against his skin. The galaxy whispered and roared, yet their private orbit remained untouched, a sanctuary forged from the raw gravity of presence and the quiet, unwavering choice to hold and be held. In the infinite void, she had found a home, a constant, a point of gravity, and he held her with reverence, patience, and love. And as the distant stars pulsed, the meteors burned, and the galaxy continued its ceaseless dance, He understood the truth of the universe in the quiet of her pulse against his chest, that presence, trust, and the intimate gravity of connection could outweigh all cosmic forces. In the arms of a human, she had found a universe of safety and constancy, and he marveled at the immense, radiant power of that gift. He cradled her, and in that embrace, amid the endless whisper of galaxies, meteors, and suns, they had created a gravity older than time itself, a bond that even the stars could not diminish. The void stretched endlessly around them, a vast tapestry of stars, nebulae, and distant planets, yet none of it seemed real compared to the gravity of the moment in his arms. She rested fully against him now, her head tucked against his shoulder, her glowing strands of hair cascading over his chest like ribbons of living light. The subtle pulses of her bioluminescence responded to his heartbeat, creating a private rhythm unique to them, a silent symphony of trust, intimacy, and surrender. Meteors carved fiery arcs across the cosmos. Distant suns flared in brilliant crescendos, and planets rotated in slow, eternal arcs. Yet within the orbit of his embrace, all cosmic spectacle became background noise to the tender, fragile world they had created. He adjusted his hold instinctively, sliding his arms around her back, feeling the warmth of her alien body meld with his own. Her pulse, visible through faint arcs of light across her form, resonated against his chest, creating a sensation both delicate and profound. He marveled at the paradox. She was a being capable of surviving the extremes of space, of enduring storms that could vaporize entire worlds. Yet here she allowed herself to be fragile, vulnerable, and wholly dependent on a human. She had chosen him as her anchor, her constant, her center of gravity amid a universe that offered little predictability. Every subtle tremor, every quiver of delight, every flicker of her glowing hair was a message he felt deeply, reverberating through him in ways no words could ever convey. Above them, the galaxy whispered in radiant patterns of light and shadow. Stars pulsed in subtle arcs, nebula stretched in iridescent waves of violet and teal, and planets rotated in deliberate, silent orbits. Meteors streaked past in brilliant trails, igniting distant cosmic dust, and the soft hiss of distant stellar winds carried across the void like faint music. Yet all of this was mere background. The entire cosmos existed only to frame the quiet intensity of the moment in his arms. She pressed herself closer, letting her glowing hair settle over his shoulders and chest, each strand of light reflecting the distant starlight in ephemeral arcs, weaving an intimate constellation that belonged solely to them. Her breathing deepened, a subtle rhythm that synchronized gradually with his own heartbeat, creating a shared cadence older than any celestial cycle. She lifted a delicate hand, tracing the lines of his collarbone and shoulder, fingertips brushing with precise intention, as if mapping the contours of him into memory. He felt the warmth of her touch, the faint vibration of her pulse, and the gentle pressure of her surrender, and marveled at the strength inherent in it. This was not mere dependence. It was trust so profound that it could anchor them against the forces of a universe far larger than either of them. He pressed a soft kiss to the crown of her head, feeling the quiver of her delight resonate through her body and into his own, a transmission of quiet joy and intimate connection that eclipsed the grandeur of any supernova. She shifted slightly, curling more completely against him, her body glowing faintly brighter in response to his touch. The arcs of her luminescent hair floated around his arms and chest like ethereal ribbons, each pulse of light reflecting the subtle, private rhythm of their bond. Meteors continued to streak across the void, distant planets rotated in their silent, measured paths, and suns flared intermittently, yet all of it was irrelevant to the intimate orbit they had created. Her head tilted to press her temple against his chest, and he could feel the delicate vibration of her sigh, the resonance of her pulse, and the quiet surrender of a being who had given herself completely into his care. He shifted slightly to cradle her more fully, letting his hands slide along her back and shoulders, memorizing the subtle warmth of her skin, the faint oscillations of her glow, and the delicate, rhythmic quiver of her muscles. She traced gentle patterns along his chest, fingertips moving as though following the arcs of invisible constellations only she could perceive. Each pulse, each subtle tremor of delight, each exhalation of trust reinforced the quiet gravity between them. Even as stars flared and meteors streaked, the void seemed to pause, holding its breath as if acknowledging the sacred, unbreakable orbit they had formed. Minutes stretched into hours, yet the passage of time was meaningless in this suspended sanctuary. She leaned fully into him, her luminescent hair drifting across his chest, forming arcs of living light that responded to every subtle quiver of emotion. He pressed gentle kisses to her head and shoulders, feeling the warmth of her form, the subtle pulses of her alien physiology, and the profound trust she had placed in his human hands. The galaxy whispered around them, its lights and colors a backdrop for the intimate symphony of connection, surrender, and devotion unfolding in the stillness of space. Her body glowed brighter for a fleeting moment, reflecting the ebb and flow of her pulse against his chest. She moved her hands along his torso, mapping the human form with care, and he responded in kind, letting his touch reassure, protect, and anchor her. Around them, the void was alive with celestial phenomena, flares of distant suns, arcs of meteors, and planets tracing their paths in slow, silent revolutions. Yet all of it existed merely to frame the profound truth they shared, that even in a universe defined by chaos, by flaring stars and violent celestial storms, the force of trust, love, and presence between two beings could create a sanctuary more enduring than any celestial mechanism. He pressed a final, lingering kiss to the crown of her head, feeling the subtle vibration of delight ripple through her form. The stars above pulsed in soft acknowledgement. Meteors carved blazing arcs, and distant nebulae shifted in gentle waves. But none of it compared to the gravity of the moment in his arms. She had surrendered herself completely, trusting him utterly in the vast, indifferent expanse of space, and he embraced that trust with reverence, patience, and quiet awe. In that orbit, the pull between them was stronger than any black hole, more radiant than any supernova, and more enduring than the rotation of any distant planet. They had created a universe of their own, a private, intimate cosmos held together by presence, trust, and the unshakable gravity of connection. And as the void whispered with distant lights, flares, and streaks of cosmic energy, he realized that their orbit was eternal. Stars might flare, meteors might streak, planets might collide, but the quiet, radiant gravity of their bond, the shared rhythm of pulse, breath, and trust, would endure beyond time itself. She rested fully against him, glowing softly, and he cradled her, allowing every ounce of human warmth, gravity, and care to anchor her in a universe that had never felt so vast, so intimate, and so profoundly theirs. The cosmos stretched endlessly, a tapestry of glittering stars, swirling nebulae, and distant, silent planets, yet all of it seemed insignificant compared to the warmth pressed into his chest. She had shifted slightly, curling even closer, her head resting firmly against his shoulder, as if anchoring herself against the chaos of the universe. Her bioluminescent hair glimmered faintly, strands of teal and violet drifting like fluid across his torso, catching the distant starlight in arcs of living luminescence. Meteors streaked past in brilliant fire, comets traced long, luminous trails, and galaxies rotated in their silent, majestic arcs. Yet all of this seemed to fade in the presence of the quiet gravity between them. In the private orbit they had created, he felt the pulse of her trust, the surrender of her being, and the profound weight of a connection older than any stellar cycle. His hands moved slowly along her back, feeling the subtle warmth of her alien body, the gentle tremor of delight that ran through her form, and the delicate pulse of her glowing veins. Each quiver, each gentle exhalation was a message, a language that transcended words, communicating awe, surrender, and intimacy. Her alien physiology, capable of withstanding extremes that would obliterate most life, now rested entirely in the orbit of his arms, relying on his gravity, his warmth, and his patience. He pressed his cheek against the crown of her head, letting her soft luminescence brush against his skin, feeling the rhythm of her life resonate with his own heartbeat. The galaxy whispered around them, a subtle symphony of light and motion, and he realized that no cosmic spectacle could surpass the fragile, radiant beauty of a being who had chosen him completely. She shifted again, pressing against him fully, letting her hands trace delicate patterns along his chest and shoulders. Her fingers moved with purpose, memorizing the contours of his body, the rise and fall of his chest, and the subtle vibrations of life that defined him. He responded with equal care, letting his hands move along her spine, shoulders, and arms, feeling the faint tremor of her pulse in every touch. Meteors flared across the dark canvas of space, arcs of distant light reflecting against her glowing form. But even the brilliance of these celestial phenomena seemed muted in the orbit of intimacy they had established. In his arms, she had found a gravity stronger than any star, a sanctuary more enduring than any planetary orbit, and a trust that transcended distance, time, and species. Her bioluminescent hair flowed across him like a river of light, curling around his shoulders and chest in arcs that mirrored the distant nebulae. Each subtle pulse of her glow resonated with his own heartbeat, forming a private rhythm, a cadence of surrender and trust that was as delicate as it was profound. He felt the weight of her head against his collarbone, the gentle pressure of her hands along his chest, and the soft quiver of her body as she adjusted herself into a state of perfect repose. The galaxy around them flared and whispered, distant suns igniting in brilliant arcs, planets rotating silently, and meteors carving brilliant lines through the void. Yet all of it existed merely as a backdrop for the sacred gravity they had formed together. Time lost all meaning. Minutes became hours, and hours collapsed into timelessness. Her presence against him was absolute, complete, and profound. He pressed soft, deliberate kisses to the crown of her head, feeling the faint quiver of delight ripple through her alien form. Each pulse, each breath, each gentle movement reinforced the bond between them, creating a sanctuary immune to the chaos of the universe. She shifted her hands to cup his face gently, her glowing fingers tracing along his jawline, and he marveled at the perfect contrast between her alien radiance and the familiar human warmth he offered. They had found, in each other, a gravity older than any celestial force, a rhythm that could anchor life itself in the swirling chaos of existence. Around them, the cosmos whispered in grand arcs of light. Stars flared, nebulae glimmered, and distant planets rotated in slow, deliberate cycles. Meteors streaked across the void in fiery trails, yet none of it could touch the orbit they had created. She had surrendered completely to him, trusting him utterly in the vast, indifferent expanse of space, and he held her with reverence, patience, and unwavering presence. Each subtle tremor, Each exhalation, each pulse of bioluminescence formed a language only they could understand, a language of trust, surrender, and love that transcended species, distance, and time. He adjusted slightly to hold her closer, letting his arms wrap fully around her form, anchoring her not just to his body, but to the private world they shared. She pressed herself into him further, her glowing hair floating around them in gentle arcs, and he felt the warmth, the quiver, and the subtle vibration of life resonate across their intertwined orbits. The galaxy whispered, distant suns flared and faded, and meteors burned, yet all external chaos became irrelevant. In the gravity of their shared moment, they had created a universe entirely their own, a private orbit defined by trust, presence, and the intimate acknowledgement that they had become each other's home. Minutes stretched into eternity, yet the sanctuary remained unbroken. Her head rested fully against his chest, her glowing form draping over him like a living constellation. He pressed his lips to her crown, feeling the tremor of delight ripple through her, and let the rhythm of her breathing guide the subtle movements of his embrace. Meteors flared, planets rotated, and suns ignited in distant brilliance, yet all of it seemed secondary to the profound intimacy they had forged. In the arms of a human, she had found a constant, a gravity point, and a home, and he embraced that responsibility with quiet awe and infinite care. The galaxy whispered its endless song around them, and in that song he understood the immense power of presence, surrender, and love. She was his gravity, and he was hers. Together, they had created a sanctuary resilient against the chaos of the cosmos. Each heartbeat, each quiver of delight, each pulse of bioluminescence reinforced the bond, crafting a private universe where nothing mattered but the delicate, radiant connection they shared. And as the stars flared, the planets rotated, and meteors streaked through the void, he held her close, and the infinite universe felt both vast and impossibly small, reduced to the quiet, sacred gravity of two beings entwined in trust, surrender, and the profound intimacy of shared presence. He held her as the cosmos continued its endless, silent ballet around them, each flare of distant suns, each arc of meteors, and each slowly rotating planet a whispering witness to the gravity of their connection. Her head rested against his shoulder, her luminous hair cascading over his chest like rivers of starlight, each strand reflecting distant nebula in fleeting arcs of violet, teal, and gold. She exhaled softly, and he felt the delicate vibration pulse against him, a rhythm of surrender, trust, and quiet exhilaration that seemed to resonate with the heartbeat of the entire galaxy. The universe, vast and indifferent, seemed to pause in respect for this intimate orbit they had created. Every detail of her alien form fascinated him. Her bioluminescent patterns shifted subtly with each breath, arcs of light flickering in synchrony with the rise and fall of her chest, a private constellation that existed solely in their shared presence. She was a creature of immense cosmic resilience, able to withstand extremes that would obliterate most life. Yet here, she was fragile and utterly dependent on him, surrendering herself completely. The paradox was not lost on him. A being who had survived cosmic storms, interstellar radiation, and the void's crushing isolation now rested entirely within the orbit of a human's arms. And in that surrender, he felt the profound weight of trust, a force stronger than gravity itself, a bond that eclipsed even the celestial forces dancing around them. He adjusted slightly, pressing her closer against him, letting his hands cradle her fully, tracing along the subtle curves of her form. Each gentle movement was deliberate, a silent promise to protect, to cherish, and to honor the profound intimacy she offered. Her pulse, faintly visible through the arcs of light along her body, seemed to sync ever more perfectly with his own, creating a rhythm that felt older than stars themselves. Meteors streaked past in fiery arcs, distant suns flared with dazzling brilliance, and planets rotated silently in their predetermined orbits. Yet all of this faded into insignificance beside the private universe they had created in the stillness of his embrace. Her hands moved lightly over his chest, fingertips brushing in patterns that were both deliberate and instinctive, mapping him into memory as he did the same with her. She shifted slightly, pressing her body fully against him, and he felt every pulse, every subtle quiver, and every exhalation resonate like a note in a symphony only they could hear. Her hair, a glowing cascade of colors, floated around them like nebulae caught in miniature orbits, and he traced the luminescent strands with his fingers, feeling the warmth and the subtle vibrations of life that spoke volumes without words. They had created a sanctuary in the vast expanse of the void, a private orbit where trust, surrender, and presence were more powerful than the combined forces of the galaxy. Minutes became hours, hours became timelessness, and yet the intimacy of their connection deepened with every passing heartbeat. She exhaled against his chest, a soft, trembling sound that resonated through him, and he felt the profound responsibility of being her anchor in a universe that offered little certainty. His hands moved with care along her back, shoulders, and arms, memorizing the delicate oscillations of her form, and she responded with equal tenderness, letting her hands trace the lines of his body as if imprinting him permanently upon her memory. Around them, the galaxy continued to whisper, distant stars flared, meteors carved arcs of fire across the void, and planets rotated in quiet, majestic precision, yet none of it could touch the sanctuary they had forged. He pressed a gentle kiss to the crown of her head, feeling the faint shiver of delight ripple through her body. She tilted her head slightly, allowing him to cradle her more fully, and he felt the subtle pulse of her bioluminescent glow accelerate in response to his touch. In that moment, he understood the depth of her surrender. She had entrusted him with her presence, her safety, and her being in a universe where trust was rarer than life itself. The gravity of that choice was overwhelming, yet exhilarating, and he embraced it with reverence and quiet joy. Her glowing hair drifted across his shoulders and chest like threads of living light, catching the reflections of distant nebulae, stars, and flaring suns. Each strand seemed to pulse in rhythm with their intertwined heartbeats, weaving a tapestry of intimacy that transcended species, distance, and time. Meteors flared past, and planets rotated in silent arcs, yet all external movement became background to the intensity of the orbit they had created. He pressed his cheek to hers, feeling the warmth of her form, the subtle quiver of her delight, and the profound resonance of her trust. In the infinite void, they had created a gravity stronger than any star, a bond more enduring than the orbits of galaxies, and a universe entirely their own. She exhaled softly, nestling further into his embrace, and he adjusted his hold to cradle her completely. His hands traced the delicate lines of her back and shoulders, memorizing the contours, warmth, and vibrations of life that she offered him so freely. The galaxy whispered and roared, distant suns flared, and meteors carved blazing paths through the void. But in the orbit of his arms, all external chaos ceased to exist. She had found a home in him, and he had found a universe in her surrender. The private gravity they shared was eternal, unshakable, and radiant, more luminous than any star and more enduring than any planet. As time stretched infinitely, he realized that this moment was the apex of existence itself, a human and an alien suspended in the vast expanse of space, sharing trust,
surrender, and presence in a bond that eclipsed the grandeur of galaxies. Her head rested against his shoulder, her glowing form draped across him, and the galaxy whispered its approval in bursts of distant light. Meteors streaked past, nebula shimmered, and planets rotated silently, yet all of it seemed merely to frame the sacred intimacy between them. He pressed a final, lingering kiss to her head, feeling the subtle quiver of delight and trust ripple through her, and in that infinite moment he understood the true gravity of love, presence, and connection. That in the arms of another, the entire universe could feel small, intimate, and eternally radiant.
And as the galaxy continued its ceaseless whisper, he cradled her, and together they existed in a perfect orbit of trust, surrender, and cosmic intimacy, a private universe of their own making, more enduring than time, more luminous than stars, and more profound than the combined forces of the cosmos itself.